Hello friends. Welcome to Radio Mind, where we explore the mysteries of the past, present, future and the disturbed. On this episode we will be looking into the face of evil with a touch of disturbing madness. Imagine being too young to defend yourself and not knowing your inevitable doom is near. Our first subject. Amelia Dyer. Nicknamed the Angel Maker. She is known to be one of the most deadliest serial killers in the Victorian era. Let's take a journey back to the mid-19th century Victorian England where this horror story takes place.
June 10, 1838. Amelia Dyer was born into an upper-middle-class family in a small village of Pyle Marsh, located just east of Bristol. She had 3 brothers and 1 sister. Amelia is the youngest out of her siblings. Her father was a master shoemaker, Samuel Hobley, and her mother was Sarah Hobley née Weymouth. When Amelia was young, she watched her mom suffer from mental illness due to typhus. Her mom eventually died in 1848. Amelia relocated to Bristol to live with her aunt after her mother's death before serving as an apprenticeship with a corset maker. Her father died in 1859 and left his shoe business to his son, which is her oldest brother. She moved shortly thereafter into a lodgings. There she married George Thomas and also pursued a career in nursing. She studied as a nurse for a couple of years after marrying George Thomas, in which she gained the essential skills to serve her patients. Within that time, Amelia and her husband decided to start a family and they had 2 kids. At some point working as a nurse, she crossed paths with a midwife named Ellen Dane, who is another unscrupulous character in this sad but true story. In conversations with Ellen, she proposed an idea to Amelia about using her own home to provide housing for young women who had given birth to illegitimate children and then farming off the babies for adoption, or just starving out the infants until they died. Ellen Dane was forced to escape the prying eyes of the authorities by moving to the US shortly after meeting Amelia. In 1834, the United Kingdom's Parliament passed the Poor Law Amendment Act, which relieved fathers of illegitimate children of any financial obligations. Since that law was passed, it led to the practice of baby farming. Single mothers with illegitimate children in Victorian England frequently struggled to make ends meet while raising their kids. Some put their kids up for adoption or use fostering agents that suggested they could make ongoing payments or a one-time fee for the newborns that the mother couldn't take care of. With the birth of her daughter, Ellen Thomas, Dyer was forced to leave nursing. She needed money after the death of her husband, the elderly George Thomas, in 1869. Dyer remembered a particular conversation she had with midwife Ellen Dane about baby farming. At that moment she realized opening up her home to take care of infants might be her only option to make fast money. She then began taking in mothers that were unaware of her practices. She put out advert that she would nurse and adopt a baby in exchange for a large one-time payment and a clean supply of clothing for the child. She assured clients in her adverts and meetings that she was a responsible, carrying and married woman. She also assured the mothers that she would provide a safe home for the child. Shortly after opening up her home to baby farming, Dyer quickly became overwhelmed and short of funding to take care of the infants. She resorted to some very unscrupulous acts like starving out the poor babies, which is one of the most painfulest ways to die. The cries of the newborns became so unbearable she started to sedate a lot of the infants using alcohol and/or opiates. Mother's Friend, which is known as Godfrey's Cordial, was a popular choice at the time, along with a syrup containing opium that were also used to keep the babies quiet. Many babies perished from these dubious acts. At some point she came to the conclusion in her baby farming career that it wasn't worth it for her to inconvenience herself by taking care of the babies she adopted. She believed it was best to just murder them as soon as she receives them and pocket the money. Waiting for them to die from neglect and starvation took too long. The solution she came up with was extremely effective and very lethal. Dyer was able to escape the police attention for some time. She was apprehended in 1879 after a doctor became suspicious of the number of children that kept turning up dead in her care. Instead of being found guilty of murder or manslaughter, She was sentenced to 6 months in prison for neglect. When Amelia was released from prison, she tried unsuccessfully to get back into nursing, but her mental breakdowns and suicide attempts destroyed her nursing career. She ended up in mental hospitals off and on due to her mental instability. But there is a strong possibility, since she started using opium-based products early in her killing career, that might have led to her being mentally unstable. Amelia began taking care of an illegitimate baby of an unsuspecting governess in 1890. When the lady returned to check on her child, she noticed something odd and became suspicious. The governess began to strip the baby to check for a birthmark on one of its hips. There was no birthmark. Amelia ended up having a nervous breakdown as a result of the authorities' long-held suspicions about her. She tried to commit suicide by consuming 2 bottles of laudanum at one point. But her body became used to the abuse of laudanum and had built up a tolerance to opium products. She survived, unfortunately. She was sent back to the Wells Mental Asylum, where she completed her final committal in 1893. Unlike previous breakdowns, this one was a nightmare, and she never returned to the asylum again. Upon release from the mental institute, she got back into baby farming once more. Dyer realized her mistake in enlisting doctors to issue death certificates. She came up with a devious plan to discard the bodies by herself. She noticed her activities were starting to garner unwanted attention from parents who contacted authorities seeking to reclaim their children. She somehow convinced her family to frequently relocate to different towns and cities in order to escape the prying eyes of the authorities. This helped her to regain anonymity while she established a new business. She also used a number of aliases over the years, which helped to conceal her identity. Dyer and her family, which included her daughter and son-in-law, moved to Caversham, Berkshire. She also convinced Jane Granny Smith, whom she known previously and who became an unwitting associate, to come with them. Evelina Marmon, a well-known barmaid, gave birth to a baby girl named Doris in a boarding house. The child was illegitimate. Because of her financial situation, she knew she couldn't take care of an infant. She quickly put an advertisement in the local newspaper. "Wanted, decent woman to accept little child," it simply stated. Marmon intended to return to work and hoped to regain her child in the future. Surprisingly, a few days later, Marmon read an advertisement in the local newspaper next to her own that said, "Looking for a healthy child, wonderful country home would be adopted by a married couple with no children. £10 is the price." She wrote a letter to the person that placed the ad and got a response back within a few days from Mrs. Harding, aka Amelia Dyer. Evelina was stressed for money at the time and wanted to pay a more affordable weekly fee for her daughter's care, but Mrs. Harding insisted on receiving the one-time payment in advance. She knew she had no choice but to come up with the money, even though she couldn't afford it. With some hesitation, she agreed to pay the £10, and Mrs. Harding arranged a meeting a week later. When Evelina saw Dyer, she was apparently taken aback by how old Dyer looked and her stocky appearance. But Dyer appeared to be very fond of Doris. She surrendered her daughter, a cardboard box of clean clothes, and the £10. Evelina, who was still upset about having to give up care for her daughter, accompanied Dyer to the train station and kissed her daughter goodbye and returned to her home. A few days later, she received a letter from Mrs. Harding stating that everything was fine. She responded, but never got a response back from Mrs. Harding. Marmon believed Dyer was going back to reading with her baby, but she wasn't. In fact, Dyer took the baby girl to her daughter's home, where she desperately found some white edging tape, wrapped it twice around the baby's neck, and tied a knot. Death would not have been instantaneous. Amelia later said in a statement to the police she loved to watching those babies choke to death with tape wrapped around their necks. The next day, Wednesday, April 1st, after killing the baby girl, she was able to get her hands on another unsuspecting soul. This time it was a 13-month-old boy named Harry Simmons. She removed the white edging tape from Doris' corpse and strangled the baby boy to death. On April 2nd, both bodies were loaded into a carpet bag with bricks for extra weight. She disposed both of the bodies through a railing that led into the river. Amelia Dyer's disturbing activities was now becoming noticed by the authorities. On March 30, 1896, a bargeman retrieved a package that was floating in the river. When he opened the package, he became disturbed when he realized in the box contained a little deceased baby. He immediately alerted the police. The police were able to identify the baby as Helena Fry. A detective, Constable Anderson, who was working on the case at the time, had made a crucial breakthrough and was able to trace the paper that the baby was wrapped into, a Mrs. Thomas, and an address. He used a microscope to read the faintly legible name. On April 3, police set up a decoy for Dyer to meet up with. But instead, at the last minute, they decided to raid her home. When they enter into the front door, the officers were struck by a strong scent of human decomposition, although no human remains were found. But detectives found a plethora of other related evidence, such as white edging tape, telegrams regarding adoption arrangements, pawn tickets for children's clothing, advert receipts, and letters from mothers concerned about the well-being of their children. During the inquiry, police uncovered that in only the last few months, at least 20 children had been placed in the custody of a Mrs. Thomas, who has been identified to be Amelia Dyer. She also appeared to be planning a move to a different part of the country. They just caught her in the nick of time. According to some police estimates, Mrs. Dyer may have killed over 400 babies and children over the course of decades, making her one of the most prolific serial killers ever. On April 4, Amelia Dyer was arrested and charged with murder. In the second week of April, the Thames River was pulled, and 6 more bodies were recovered, including Dyer's final victims, Doris Marman and Harry Simmons. Each infant was strangled with her signature white tape, which she told investigators was how you could tell it was one of mine. Amelia Dyer appeared in court on May 22, 1896 and pleaded guilty to the murder of Doris Marman. Her family testified against her at her trial. They said in court that they grew suspicious about her behavior and how she would act very strange around the infants. During her court proceedings, they discovered an unsuspecting witness who was called to testify that he had seen and spoken to Dyer after she had dumped the bodies in the river. That witness' testimony was able to put her at the crime scene. But her daughter's disturbing testimony that stunned the court for the prosecution was key to securing a conviction against her mother. Dyer had pleaded with the court that she was insane and had been committed to a mental health facility on a few occasions. But in the end, the court didn't believe her. The prosecution was successful on breaking down her defense. They successfully argued that her displays of mental instability were a ploy to avoid suspicion. Both committals were said to have coincided with times when Dyer was concerned that her crimes would be exposed. It didn't take the jury long to convict her. Within 4 minutes after the judge stopped talking, they said guilty. Her fate was sealed. While she waited in her cell for 3 long weeks, she was able to fill out 5 exercise books confessing to all of her crimes in detail. The night before her hanging, she was visited by a chaplain. He asked Amelia if she wanted to make a confession. She offered him her exercise books, saying, "Isn't this enough?" Amelia Dyer's infamous reign as the baby farmer murderer has come to an end. On Wednesday, June 10, 1896, she was asked, "Do you have anything that you want to say?" She said, "I have nothing to say." She was hanged by James Billington at Newgate Prison at 9 a.m. In later developments, to this day it is unknown how many babies Amelia Dyer had slain on her brief time on this planet. But it's said to believe inquiries from mothers, evidence from other witnesses, and material discovered in Dyer's homes, including letters and many babies' clothes, indicated that there were many more. The Dyer case sparked a scandal in Victoria, England, causing the government to tighten adoption regulations and give local authorities the power to investigate baby farms in the hope of stamping out abuse. Unfortunately, despite newspaper personal ads being scrutinized, infant trafficking and abuse continued. There was an author at the time by the name of William Stewart, who made a suggestion that Amelia Dyer could be Jack the Ripper, since both murderers existed at the same time. Some people also believe this to be true even though there was no substantial evidence to back this up.
The old baby farmer, the wretched Miss Dyer at the Old Bailey, her wages is paid. In times long ago, we'd made a big fire and roasted so nicely that wicked old jade. That was a popular ballad that was inspired by Ogress of Reading, a nickname given to Amelia Dyer by the kids in grade school at the time. Imagine if this woman was your babysitter. That would be a very terrifying thought. Thanks for watching this episode of Radio Mind. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. Until next time, be safe and remember, don't let everyday stresses kill your spirit and imagination.